Hi, this is your professor, Judy Paparosi, and I wanted to go over some last-minute hints for you for the final exam, as well as some hints for your writing that I think has progressed pretty well during this semester. I hope you have found that these grammar lessons and my editing of all your essays and pointing out your errors and so forth has been helpful. But here are some errors that I keep seeing, especially in your summer vacation essays and the probation and parole officer essays that I've just graded a bunch of. Anyway, excuse me. Number one, and please take notes. Number one, capitalization. So the rules for capitalization in English are very simple. We capitalize the pronoun I. That's it. Number two, we capitalize the first word of every sentence. And three, we capitalize names. So my name for you guys is Professor Paparosi, so I capitalize the word professor. But if I'm referring to my professor, I don't capitalize it because it's not part of a name. So those are the three rules that if you follow, you won't have any problems. So if we abbreviate like law enforcement officer as an LEO, that you capitalize. And if any of you take my human trafficking class, I refer to it as HT, but we don't capitalize HT. I'm referring to it as an abbreviation. It's not even an abbreviation, but it's just shorthand. So even if it's capitalized in an abbreviation like LEO or HT or NGO or whatever, that doesn't mean it gets capitalized unless it follows one of the rules for capitalization, which is 1, the pronoun I, 2, the first word of every sentence, and the first word after a colon when both are sentences, but that's a little sophisticated. Number 3, any and all names with the titles that go with them. So if you're on a police force and you're a captain, your name is Captain McDonald. Capital C for captain, and of course you capitalize McDonald because it's a name. But see, that's part of your name as a title. So that's number 1, the rules of capitalization in a nutshell. Number 2, many of you are still not using the punctuation that I've taught you to prevent run-on sentences. What is a run-on sentence? It's a sentence. It's actually 2 sentences combined because they're very related. Professor Paparosi used to surf and she still loves the ocean. So if I could say those in one sentence, I would have to separate them because I have 2 different sentences. So Professor Paparosi used to surf, period. She still loves the ocean, period. They'd be separate sentences. When I combine them with a conjunction like and, but, for, since, if, I have to make sure if there's a subject and a verb and a complete thought in the first part, and a subject and a verb and a complete thought in the second part, those are sentences, and I have to run them together, if I want to, in one of 2 ways. I can either use a semicolon, or I can use a conjunction like and with a comma. You're remembering now to use the and, but you're forgetting the comma. In fact, you're using commas in places where you don't need to use a comma. The rules for commas can be complex, but if you simplify it and don't use that rule if I hear a pause, because you may hear a pause, but I don't hear it. I don't want the pause. I wouldn't have put a pause in a sentence. So try to go over the rules for commas carefully, and I'll get to that in a second. But I'm really concerned about run-on sentences because that will hurt your grades in future classes. So if you have 2 complete sentences, subject, verb, complete thought, subject, verb, complete thought, in both parts of the sentence, you can either use a semicolon, the best way of joining anything. It's so easy because it shows, the semicolon shows it's very related, or you can use comma with a conjunction, comma and, comma but, comma for, comma since, whatever. But it must be 2 sentences on both sides of these, either the semicolon or the comma and the period, comma and the conjunction. Now let me make a really important point here. Some of you will have 1 subject and 2 verbs. Professor Paparosi used to run and used to surf. And you'd put a comma in because you see the word and. But there's only 1 subject, Professor Paparosi. So there's no comma needed. There's only 1 subject, Professor Paparosi, if I said that wrong. There's only 1 subject, Professor Paparosi, but there's 2 verbs. Used to surf, used to swim, or whatever I just said. I just run and swim. Okay, so I have 2 verbs, but I don't have 2 sentences. I only have 1 subject, 2 verbs. No commas needed, unless it's needed for another reason, which we'll go over these points. All right, that's the second point. Try to avoid the run-on sentences. Refer back to what I've taught you about run-on sentences, and it's really important, one of the most important skills that you can have to punctuate a run-on sentence and prevent a run-on sentence well. Number 3, Introductory phrases are 4 words or more that introduce something in a sentence but are not part of the main sentence. In other words, the next words are the subject, verb, and the complete thought, but what goes into it, for example, when I was young, comma. You must set it off with a comma. When I was young, for. I use it for almost everything. If it's not part of the main sentence, it's an intro into the main sentence, I set it off with a comma by default. Another example would be, coming home late last night, comma, I ran into a deer. I didn't, but I'm just saying. So coming home late last night has nothing to do with the deer. It's just an intro to what I'm going to be telling you. So that introductory clause or phrase needs to be set off by a comma. That's number 3. Number 4, we don't use an abbreviation in a date if there's a year. So if it's today is November 21st, 2019. But if I'm talking to somebody, I said, oh, you remember on November 21st I did such and such. So we only add that ST or TH or RD to abbreviate when there's no year. Stop making that mistake, okay? Because many of you are making it, and I still don't understand why you're making it, because we practiced it and I saw so many people did it perfectly. So if it's November 21st, 2019, you write November, you write 21, 21, comma, 2019. If you're only referring to Thursday, November 28th, which is Thanksgiving, then you would add the TH because I didn't mention the year. So that's the rule. Please abide by it. Okay. Many of you make this mistake. You don't know how to pluralize a word, so you add an apostrophe. An apostrophe is used to show contractions and possession. It is not used to make things plural. In very rare cases, which we saw occasions, like sevens, S apostrophe, 7 apostrophe S, or C apostrophe S. I don't even use it. I use parentheses, but it's acceptable, so I showed it to you. You do not use an apostrophe to show any plurals. You just don't do it, except that narrow exception. So I see people who will write, she brought me apples, and you put apostrophe S. Apples what? I mean, it's not showing a possession, and apples is not a contraction for anything. It's the plural. So APPLES. So just get it out of your mind. You cannot use an apostrophe to make a word plural. Don't do it. We show possession. We put an apostrophe S if it's singular, or an S apostrophe if it's plural. And if you don't know, put a word in your Google search and see how it comes out under possessive plural, how you would spell it. Sometimes you get confused with double S's at the end or a Z at the end or whatever. But keep it simple. Here's the rule. If it's singular, it's apostrophe S at the end of the word. If it's plural, the word is plural. Like, remember we were doing, oh, that was different. That's another class. Anyway, so just remember that rule. Singular is apostrophe S, plural is S apostrophe, okay? When it comes to quotation marks, the rule is very simple. Periods and commas, 99.9% of the time, go inside of the quotation mark. It is so rare to see them on, by the way, Jeopardy does it wrong. If you watch Jeopardy, it drives me crazy. Jeopardy actually does it wrong, and it drives me crazy that somebody on that smart show hasn't figured out to put the commas and the periods inside of the quotation marks rather than outside. So we get confused because we see a lot of mistakes everywhere. But the commas and periods go inside. Question marks, if the whole sentence is a question, it goes outside. If it's a quotation mark within a sentence, not a question, you put it inside the question within the sentence. Okay, and then when you have quotations, you capitalize the first word of it. So we saw this in your DWI reports. You were starting it because it was in the middle of the sentence with a lowercase, but you have to capitalize it because you have to capitalize at the beginning of a sentence. We know that. So the murderer said, she did it. You have to capitalize she because those are his words that you're repeating. Okay, I think I've gone over pretty much everything. I did go over that. And I think I went over everything. So I think you'll do well on your final exam, which has an essay attached to it, your 10th essay. Please take your time and proofread your essays. And I've really enjoyed teaching this class, and I hope you have a happy Thanksgiving. And if I don't, of course, I'll be speak to you. Have a Merry Christmas to those who celebrate Christmas, and Happy Hanukkah to those who celebrate Hanukkah, and Happy Kwanzaa. And It's been great, and I hope you've learned a lot in this class. Thank you.